updated predictions on the retro gaming bubble to burst. How have things changed since the last prediction? We haven't had a prediction at least a year, I think, at this point.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, let's just put it this way. The last time we did inventory price changes for NES, the upward movement on the more expensive games was smaller than it usually is, and the amount of games that went down by a few bucks was a lot more than it usually is. I think we're just kind of hitting that ceiling where people just aren't going to be paying more for a lot of these titles. And I mean,
we're not going to see a $70 Contra.
No, we're just not going to. And I mean, as fun as Portland was, I mean, there's people that, I mean, you know, someone came up to me at the booth and wanted to talk about it, and they're like, why am I seeing like 20 copies of Earthbound here with $200 price tags? And it was interesting because I had just had this conversation with someone earlier in the week, and okay, so we haven't had an Earthbound in the store in a long time. Prior to that, we had like 5 within 2 months, the January and February after 2 Christmases ago. Okay.
So 2013.
No, 2004, January and February 2014. Okay. And they all flew off the shelves. And the reason why I don't think we've seen a lot of them come back in is because I think all the people who really want to, because the Earthbound thing was a craze for a while, right? I think most of the people who want to own a physical copy of Earthbound at this point have found it. So you've got all these people who picked up these, you know, bought up these copies of Earthbound, assuming they paid fairly for them for a high price, and are still trying to offload them at $200 to make their money back when the market just isn't there anymore for a $200 copy of Earthbound.
For a game that's not rare.
Yeah, I'm not feeling great, but am I making some sense here?
The number of sellers holding inventory is starting to outpace the demand to get rid of that inventory.
Thank you. There you go.
Which is what I wanted to comment about. At Portland Retro Gaming Expo, which is probably it's the biggest retro gaming convention, if not in the world, definitely is in the U.S. In North America. That's probably the ground zero for what's going on in the hobby, at least to me. Obviously, it's in the corner of the U.S., but you get sellers from all over.
It's a very good barometer.
Very good barometer. So I've seen it. I've seen just through that convention, the hobby changed the past 6 years.
Yeah.
From 2011 to now. Going from in 2011, a smaller area with probably 300 to 500 people, to this past year with what, 8 to 10,000 people maybe?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Easy.
And 200 vendors, 80 to 90% of those which were retro game vendors.
Yeah.
So what you have then are vendors pricing at or above eBay for their prices at a convention. And no, they're going to sell stuff. Absolutely, because people are going to come there to sell. Which isn't the argument I'm even talking about. What I'm talking about is the volume of sellers that we have out there right now, whether it's brick and mortar stores, but mostly combined with online dealers. Some of those were online dealers that came, probably most were online dealers that came to sell there. You have so much quote unquote retro game inventory that's in the hands of sellers right now at this really weird rate where there could be, I'm not saying it's definite, but there could be this tipping point that happens at some point. Because we're not making new NES games anymore. What happens when, if there's even 5% or 10% more retro games in sellers' hands, these are not games they want to keep. They want to move these games.
Right.
What happens when you have more games to move than buyers to buy them? What happens? I'm not saying overall number of games, but what happens when you have 10 or 20% more Contras than remaining people that need a Contra?
Right.
Because you're never going to get to the point, yes, some Contras were thrown out, loss. You're never going to get to the point where there's going to be a number of people that want a Contra now versus the number that wanted it back when it first came out. You're not going to get to that point.
Sure.
So what happens then when people realize that, or say, okay, I'm out, I don't want your $50 Contra or $40, whatever it was at the show, I didn't even notice. What happens? Are they forced?
Well, they're forced to drop the price.
Does confidence then go for just that game? Does it go for a bunch of other games?
I mean, it depends. It could start a bit of a domino effect.
What happens when right now you have a pure speculative market on games? I'm going to say those late release title games like Little Samson.
Mm-hmm.
Is one of the main reasons that game's $1,000 because you go to a show like Portland, you can find 10 or 15 of them for sale?
Yeah. Well, I guess that's, I didn't, and that's exactly it. Like, I didn't finish my statement. So the reason I feel like I don't get Earthbounds in anymore is because San Diego's taken care of for Earthbounds. Very few people call me up and ask for it anymore. Mm-hmm. Most of the people who are asking just want to know if I have one. They then say, I've already got my copy.
So the market's saturated.
In San Diego. The people who want it have it, and they're not selling it back to me. But you go to a place like Portland, that's not the case for all these sellers. And then, I'm sorry to finish the story, the person who was talking to me about, how they're seeing like 20 Earthbounds now, with $200 price tags. I forgot the most important thing they said was, last year and the year before, I couldn't find an Earthbound here to save my life. And so, that's the thing. Now all of a sudden there's a glut of them, and at these conventions, you could probably walk in and trip and fall on an Earthbound, just like you can walk in and trip and fall on a Little Samson. If you want a Little Samson, you can find it at a convention, no problem.
I can find it. This is the problem. There are $1,000 games that you have a hard problem finding, which to me means that they're a lot more rare than these ones are just getting swapped around between seller and buyer. You go on eBay right now, I see 1, 2, let's see, these are real ones, 3, 4, let's see, 5, 6, 7 authentic Little Samsons that are priced over $1,000. 7 of them. Then I'm not even counting the complete in box ones that are going for a few grand, or the seal one they want $30,000 for. 7 $1,000 games. The rarity is not lining up to the demand versus the price at that point. Mm-hmm. That to me tells me that that's a purely speculative market at that point. Purely. Because like I said, again, it might come down to game versus game. Like you said, you can have $100 games where maybe that's more reasonable, so those will get actually bought more by collectors. But once you see a game like that, where there's 7 at one time available at $1,000, that's just a game of chicken at that point. At what point?
Crack a beer and sit tight.
Yeah. Again, that doesn't mean every game is going to crash. That Little Samson at some point, that's coming down. I think that has to at some point. Whether it's this year, next year, 3 years, this isn't a fucking Steam events game where you have to search high and low. This is a game where, again, we could have bought 5 of them in fucking Portland if we wanted to. I can buy 10 of them online right now. And there's probably sellers doing that, like that fucking Game King guy, and buying 20 and driving up the price. That's a bubble. That's speculation. Again, it's going to vary system to system. But like you said, there will be a point where people don't want to pay $50 for a common game like Legend of Zelda. It just it ain't going to happen. Mm-hmm. People have to worry about themselves, worry about life, and just get a fucking flash card and be done with it. And just say, okay, bye everyone. I'd rather have money and go on vacations and not eat ramen for the rest of my life and still enjoy video games.